Medical report, and one of my favorite people is John, who makes our NUTRIODINE, a #1 nutraceutical here at Nutrimedical. And I'm going to go into a few other things that we haven't gone into the past. John, you're aware of the prophecies of Edgar Cayce, who is the intuitive, and he had to go into an altered state in order to be able to literally diagnose. He actually had fairly prominent people actually consulted him because his gifts were so well known. And people that listen to the program know that I'm also a medical intuitive, but I don't have to go into an altered state. And I want to give people a little bit of history of why, the purpose behind spiritually and physically, why Edgar Cayce prophesied this. Now, one of the things that I teach and preach on this show is exactly the principles of the greatest metaphysician that ever lived, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Father in the flesh. But he also said, when I return, you shall be as I am. So he's saying qualitatively, human beings are not different than what he is, which is the incarnation of the Creator God. So are we. And what he was saying is we're both an I and a we at the same time. So when I do an intuitive reading for someone, whether in another country or another part of the world, basically the wall between I and them disappears. Well, people need to realize we're both an individual, but we're also a we that is not only in the present, but also spreads into the past and the future. They have to know that also our mind, our brain, is not our mind. Our mind is the same thing as our soul. And it connects to a thing that's in the Bible called the silver cord, or the cord of living waters, is what I was told. The cord of living waters basically connects our physical world, which is 5 dimensions. The 5th dimension is the Higgs field, or the gravitonic field, where time-space is embedded. It creates the wormholes that connect across the galaxy, and also is what we call the basis for dark matter and dark energy. It turns out that NUTRIODINE was prophesied because the primary thing that's happening now, since the Second World War, is 10,000 chemicals in every individual. In fact, if you get, and I'll have on the program again soon, Dr. William Ray from the Dallas Environmental Health Center, and they can do now a breath analysis and tell you all the volatile chemicals in your breath of the chemicals in your tissues. Now, I've said for decades, off to their lab and also to Dr. Sloan-White at the Research Toxicology Lab in Richardson, Texas, that's used by the NSA and CIA for decades, fat biopsies and red blood cell blood samples to look at the volatile chemicals using high-pressure chromatography and nuclear spectroscopy. The nastiest of all these chemicals are, even more so than even radiotoxins, are halides. Halides meaning fluoride, chloride, and bromide, because they damage your mitochondria, and your mitochondria run on iodine. T3, for example, and most people should understand this, when you take fluoridated water, you displace iodine from the T3 molecule, and you have, instead of T3I, which is 3 iodines attached to a globulin called a thyroglobulin molecule, you actually have T3F, fluoride. Not good. And it binds it non-competitively with the crystal gallia of the mitochondria and shuts off your oxidative metabolism, so your energetics of your cell, your ability to generate ATP and NADH, decreases. The redox potential drops, your tissues become acid rather than alkaline, they bioaccumulate toxins and radiotoxins and grow stealth pathogens which switch on and off genes, causing autoimmune disease and cancer, and literally start the process called cell senescence, where they actually start to silence genes. This is what we call aging. Aging is not a natural process. If you have the right conditions, the humans should not have senescence. And what I've discovered, and I'm working with scientists, Dr. Nesterov in Russia, and scientists will be coming here in California, Dr. Wong and Michael Chen, their engineer, is we are on the verge within 5 to 20 years of being able to stop human senescence. And the first step in that process is to resurrect mitochondrial function. If you were to pick one marker of how old you're going to live, it would be how healthy your mitochondria are. And in fact, you can do mitochondrial studies that can prove that you get all your mitochondria from your mother, your grandmother, and your great-grandmother, and if they didn't die traumatically or of a major disease or war, you can average their lifespan, subtract 2 years for the average male, and add 3 years for the average female, and that gives you your potential lifespan. Now, of course, if you add NutriMed, you can extend that dramatically, and if you add scalar technologies such as micropulse, lumen photon, X-Vitalizer, and our new thing called ATLRS or Metatron, morphogenic field therapy, mild hyperbaric oxygen, etc., you can dramatically change that. But the most important thing of all is NUTRIODINE. And the reason is it's the only thing that's a high-energy form of iodine that can flush the body of halides, fluoride, chloride, and bromide, and resurrect your mitochondria. It's the only thing that literally, once your mitochondria are resurrected, your cells don't go through what's called programmed senescence. So if you want to extend your lifespan, the most important single thing you take, not only for your baby in development to develop a bigger brain and more neural connections, to maintain your redox state to prevent cancer, to kill off stealth intracellular pathogens, because cancer is an infection and autoimmune disease is an intracellular infection that triggers off autoimmunity because the cell surface proteins are changed. And they trigger off the non-self activation of your immune system to kill your own tissues. That's why it's called autoimmunity. So the first thing is that it changes your spirituality. When you start taking NutriOdine, people start having dreams and visions. They start noticing that they have much more intuitive or empathic capacity. They start having not only higher levels of energy, but they also start having higher levels of spirituality. And we use that with Indiamese and our minerals in Life Support, Ageless, and of course Vitamineral Max Minerals Plus, because intracellular minerals and your activation of your mitochondria are key to showing and expressing your genetic and epigenetic capacity. Literally, there's a shutting down of the genome of the species, and what Edgar Cayce prophesied was basically that if you don't protect your mitochondria, you decrease human IQ, you reduce spirituality, you reduce the ability to be empathic, you reduce fertility, and you eventually reduce the ability to express your own genome from your ancestors. And that's how serious this is. And of course, since last year, with the increased levels of radiotoxins from Fukushima, the increased radiation from the disappearance of the ozone layer, the increased levels of ground level ozone because of the ultraviolet light, higher energy levels, we're getting a massive increase in what's called gene drift and new emerging species of pathogenic plague viruses. And we talked about this, H5N1, MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Virus, resistant TB, XMDR-TB, etc. What's happening is we are heading toward what I call a mitochondrial apocalypse. And some of the first symptoms are on a spiritual level, people losing empathy, people losing IQ points. They did research in China and found the only places where they found children with IQs over 170 were places where there was no fluoridation in the water. Isn't that interesting? What do you think of that, John?
Very interesting, yes.
So when people start taking NutriOdine, the first thing they notice is they say, Doc, I'm sleeping better and I'm smarter. I remember things and my muscles don't cramp. My energy, I heal faster. In fact, they can put NutriOdine on lesions on their skin or even on an open wound or burn, and it'll heal so much faster, it's mind-boggling. You restore literally the healing capacity of when you were a young person in your teens. So we try to tell people that what's happening is our world is coming to what I call a culmination. It's not the end of the world, it's a culmination of a previous age. And the age that we're suffering from right now is an age when there is evil on every possible level. Evil on a toxicological level, environmental level, spiritual and psychological level. And the reason is it's trying to stifle the creation of the new kind of human being, a new kind of species that will, if you want to call it, will take and be a steward of planet Earth and the other species, because we're supposed to be stewards. We're not supposed to kill the great whales, the smaller organisms, and the other. We're supposed to be stewards of the Earth. And all these species, for example, the desertification of the North Pacific, is basically a mitochondrial apocalypse due to radiotoxins that's killing and desertifying the North Pacific Ocean. So when we see the starfish with their arms falling off and the salmon run dying, and the great whales no longer having baby whales because they don't sing anymore in the oceans because they're dying, it's all a cause of mitochondria. So whether it's Gizmo, we talked about this in the last hour, the lizard that actually is now totally healed and he's now baking in the sun and happy old lizard, it's because he took and was given by his master NutriOdine. So if you're not taking it, if you're not giving it to yourself, if you're a pregnant mother, if you're an elderly person, if you're not getting yourself ready to protect yourself against intracellular pathogens, it'll give you bovine spongiform encephalopathy, Alzheimer's disease, and vascular problems. Why? We have this miracle molecule now available, NutriOdine. There's nothing like it anywhere. John, now that you hear my little, I call flow of consciousness rant, talking about how I rave over NutriOdine. What do you have to say? I mean, now you understand. When you did your research on Edgar Cayce, and people realized exactly what he was prophesying, and there's a lot of controversy, but remember now, nobody's perfect, neither am I. But we do have a spark of the Creator God in us. We do have a soul which transcends, which is equivalent to mind, which is supernatural. It transcends the physical body. And what I'm trying to teach people is the nature of what I call 0 and 1 of reality. We are in a war and a transition from one age to another age, a war that is both genetic, plasma physical, environmental, hyperdimensional, if you want to call it the mindscape of soul or mind, galactic and cosmic. There's a war, literally a form of opposition at every level of existence. And one of the chief cures to that is NUTRIODINE. It literally kills off stealth pathogens, protects you from radiation, restores your mind and your empathic spirit, along with things like our NDMEs and our special trax amino acid chelated minerals and our ability to stop free radicals. Because remember, if you want to call it de-resing, almost like in a hologram, you de-res with free radicals and with decrease what's called redox potential or electron density in our cytochromes. And the primary thing that brings that back, we have other things to add to it, is NUTRIODINE. And we can add things like our vascular propionyl carnitine, CoQ10, ubiquinol, CoQ10, mitochondrial catalyst, etc. But the most important of all is NUTRIODINE. That's how amazing this is. What do you have to say?
I just say that what you're saying is exactly true, I believe, because there's no way I would have ever thought that I would go into producing NUTRIODINE. I had no reason. And then I met a missionary that told me he was having these difficulties with drug-resistant malaria, and it just jumped out at me. I've got to do something to help him. I got into the K2 readings and started looking and looking, and I came across the NUTRIODINE type formula that Casey was talking about back in the 30s, and I started working toward that. And
I believe you had spiritual or hyperdimensional kind of you want to call it inspiration to know how to do it, because no one else in the world has succeeded like you've done. And there's other people trying to push things like, thyroid shield and other garbage, and they have iodides that can, in high dosage, be toxic, or iota caps or iodoral. They need to know there's nothing comparable to this. And, we have three major antipathogenics. We have NUTRIODINE, which is the most powerful of all. We have Allicin Med and Alamax Alamed. And then we have Silver 100, which is the only ionic silver. There's lots of other people marketing silver. Yours is garbage compared to our silver. It's 100% the ionic state. But the most powerful of all that'll kill anything is NUTRIODINE. It's amazing. It's amazing. And I can tell people don't realize that it doesn't matter what disease it is. For example, when you form a plaque in your arteries and you're going to get a stroke, Dr. Broda Barnes proved that everybody that develops vascular disease, every single one, every vascular disease is related to hypometabolism. I like to call it hypometabolism rather than hypothyroid. Typical hypothyroidism, you think of low thyroid because of antithyroid antibodies, antimicrosomal antithyroglobulin. And the doctors just measure T4 and T3. You need to measure a free T4 and a free T3 that's not bound to the protein. And you may need to measure a RT3, or reverse thyroid hormone. And I've postulated this. I've talked to astronaut people, including scientists at NASA, that if you want to do deep space, you want to actually give somebody a slow drip or transdermal with reverse thyroid hormone, because it'll put you into suspended animation. Literally. Now, your fatty tissues actually generate RT3, and that's why your fat tissue temperature drops, and you can do a thermogram and see someone that's overweight. Their fat tissue is actually turned on to make RT3 in the peripheral tissues by 5-deiodination rather than 5', which is why our special creams, which I've developed, and I'm going to be posting them up on the Wellness Conditions this weekend, which is a transdermal cream, includes NUTRIODINE, because you're trying to improve 5' deiodination in the peripheral fatty tissues to get rid of cellulite or obesity, because it's actually a metabolic adaptation, so you don't starve or lose lean body mass by preserving fat. And the body, what it does is literally shuts off the metabolism of fatty tissues, so calories go in like a term deposit and don't go out. Well, you want to kill off the nanobacteria in artery walls to stop the formation of plaque. You want to restore normal mitochondrial function of your heart and blood vessels. And as I said before, hypertension is simply your heart trying to compensate for decreased perfusion because you don't have peristaltic waves of contraction of your blood vessel walls of your arteries and nitric oxide generation, because you've got hypometabolism, which means it comes back to NUTRIODINE. So when you start giving people NUTRIODINE along with our things like Supernox to increase nitric oxide and KARDIOVASC and gamma A plus to restore your ion channels, and magnesium to act as a calcium ion counterion. The NUTRIODINE has to start restoring what we call capillary and arteriolar and vascular and venule activity that pumps the blood around your body. It's not your heart. Your heart is only the primary wave. And when your heart blood pressure goes up, it's your heart trying to compensate for the fact your blood vessels aren't working. And the blood vessels aren't working because you don't have enough metabolism, and the metabolism is gone because you're not deiodinating iodine to create 5' deiodination and mitochondrial function in your arteries. Isn't that interesting? So in other words, heart disease is caused by lack of activated T3 in your mitochondria, in your blood vessel walls, caused by lack of activated iodine, or being blocked by fluoride, chloride, or bromide. Back in the 70s, they switched from using iodine in bread to using bromide, which is bad. It blocks thyroid metabolism. We know that there's natural missing now iodine in the food all around the country. People don't realize that all heart disease is basically hypometabolism. You can't have hypertension. You can't have heart disease unless you have hypometabolism. And most of them have TRS, we call metabolic syndrome, which I discovered along with Dr. Otto Hewen, and got persecuted for it, by the way. People need to know that it was my original research, and I got threatened by the Dr. Roy Lariche of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta back in 1982 because of my work with Dr. Hewen, head of pathology. So that's the facts, and I have repeatedly been persecuted for things I've discovered. I have a different attitude now. I'm like half a lawyer. If they bother me, I'll sue them. And if they bother me, they're going to have a hell of a battle. And my attitude now is I'm going to disclose. Now I'm this age and this level of spiritual and academic level, I'm going to release all of my knowledge to future generations.
Very good.
And people need to know that NUTRIODINE is the most important nutraceutical I've ever come across and integrated into my protocols. And if you optimize, and you can check this with your own blood tests, with gerotherm thermometer to look at hypometabolism is one of the best ways, not a blood test, but a core body temperature test in the morning. Gerotherm alcohol thermometer or a high sensitivity electronic thermometer. If your core temperature is normal, you're generating enough, at least in your core. Remember, each body compartment is separate. Your brain compartment, your fatty tissue compartment, your brown fat tissue run, your internal organs, and your muscles. Each compartment under autonomic nervous system control regulates peripheral deiodination of T4 to T3 to make T3 or reverse T3. And if you make reverse T3, it blocks your thyroid and your metabolism. So that's how important NUTRIODINE is. Kills off pathogens, restores your mitochondria, extends your life, prevents gene senescence, prevents genes being meddled with by radiotoxins and chemicals and fluoride, chloride, and bromide, and literally kills off pathogens that are going to give you autoimmune disease and cancer. That's how amazing it is. There's nothing like it. If you're not, whatever else you're taking, take Vitamin Mineral Max, take NUTRIODINE. You have to be on.
This is Dan.
Welcome back, and one of my favorite people is Professor Dr. Fred Graves. I'll tell you, Dr. Graves, you've taught me so many things about the law and the operation of law and the Christian principles behind it. It's amazing. And you taught me, most importantly, that the law, you don't have to know all the bazillions of laws. You just have to master the simple principles of rules of evidence and rules of the court. And you can become a master, a pro se litigant, whether you're working with an attorney or you're doing all the actions yourself. And in fact, it's the actions of the public, especially a believing Christian public, that should be the salt and light to fix the problems of how our civilization is deteriorating by the operation of the law by real believers operating in the Christian principles of the law with these operating principles you teach in your course. I think it's one of the most important things that I do every week is having you on to talk about jurisdictionary.
Well, you're too kind.
Well, it is, really. I mean, people want to talk about solutions. I hear a lot of whining from what I call the alternative media. And to be honest with you, the problem is, it's almost like people whining to me and say, Doc, I've been suffering from all these doctors doing all these gross things to me for years. And I said, well, tell me what your problem is. And I say, oh, well, that's easy. I can do boom, 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 1, 2, 3, and here's a clinic you go to in Mexico or Europe or wherever if you have something that really needs an intervention. And most of the times they can do it at home. And I say, Doc, 2 weeks later, I say, I can't believe it, I'm better. I'm getting better. I said, that's because you did the principles at work. You do the same thing in the law that I do in medicine. You apply the principles of legal healing and the healing starts to work in society. Tell us about how you did the course and why it's so important that everybody listening doesn't just be a looky-loo and say, I'm going to click and look at this jurisdictionary. I don't know, dear, is this what we should do? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Stop looking and start doing. Stop whining and start doing, you know. People wonder they've lost their civil rights, they've lost their rights to vaccines being forced on them in California. They worry about pro-life issues, and they're whining year after year about pro-life issues, about trying to stop, let's say, abortion, so when it causes pain over 20 weeks. How about let's get rid of all abortion altogether? How about let's get rid of eugenics and the Obamacare? How about let's get rid of a lot of the corporate hoo-ha that's going on where corporations have the rights and individuals don't? That can be done by the operation of the principles in your course. Tell us how they can do it.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Bill, you're a hardworking man, and I don't know how you do it week after week, but there you are.
I take my NutriMeds and I pray a lot.
To me today, you know, I was thinking about the Irish sheepdog. That sounds off topic, but I'll come back to what you asked me.
Right.
Have you ever seen the sheepdogs work the sheep?
Oh, yeah. That's why I call myself a sheepdog for God, which means I have a bark and a bite. I am a sheepdog for God. I mean, I'm a little grizzly, a little bit snarly, but I'm lovable, and I'm going to defend them damn sheep, and if a wolf comes by, I'm going to clamp my jaws and cut off their airway.
But, you know, I was thinking the leaders must be turned.
Right.
I think we're lost in the idea that we need to change our leaders. We keep changing them, and yet we're not turning them. We're not using the courts.
No.
We need the people to be sheepdogs in court.
Exactly.
And nip at the heels of these people. Nip at the heels of the judges. Nip at the heels of the law professors. Nip at this entire edifice known as the legal profession, and force it back on track. And we can do this. You know, people can get together in communities and get the jurisdictionary course, How to Win in Court, and teach each other, and not just for fighting their own foreclosure case or their, to get out of paying their debts or whatever that's all about, but actually learning how in communities to be the sheepdogs in our legal world and force the leaders back on track, force them back within the pen where they belong, instead of wandering about with all these crazy newfangled ideas that we have and being completely out of control. I mean, the sheepdog doesn't just bark at the sheep. I mean, if necessary, he will nip at their feet or nip at their legs. But after a while, they learn to do what he wants them to do, and that's how I see the future for us. Right. Is that as the people learn how to be legal sheepdogs, if you will, and we begin nipping at these legs, first thing you know, we have leaders that are doing what they're supposed to do. We have leaders that are being turned into the right way. You know, like your Bible says in the Old Testament, where God says, don't turn to the right, don't turn to the left, go straight ahead. I will be your rear guard.
Yeah, in other words, you don't need new leaders, you need new sheepdogs. You need sheepdogs to wake up and start nipping and barking.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Go on with that idea. You're on it.
That's a good principle. I've done the same thing for 35 years now on mercury, and now the Dental Association of Europe has declared mercury a toxin, and the American Dental Association is totally freaked. Oh my gosh, we're going to get lawsuits. You need lawsuits. You need to be nipped at. You need to stop giving to our veterans mercury. You need to stop putting gutta percha in people's jaws. Well, the same thing in the legal profession. If the legal profession were constantly being nipped at by pro se litigants and judges were finding their cases being turned over, it's pretty darn embarrassing to have a non-lawyer walk into court and was using the rules of evidence and rules of procedure embarrass you in the fact that every word you said and every judgment you say is going to be overturned and brought to a higher court. After a while, these judges and these attorneys are going to realize, like, oh my gosh, I got to behave myself because this is embarrassing to have a non-lawyer walk into court or a non-judge walk into court and say, your case is going to be turned over and we're going to a higher court and these are the rules why.
and also revealing in the media what's going on and why it's going on. I've heard it's been, over 30 years ago, the first time I heard people talking about David Rockefeller and the Illuminati and all of that stuff. And here we are more than 30 years later, and not much has changed. And I think
the whining is louder.
We have to turn the leaders. We've got to get them back in the sheep pen and make them stay there, and make sure that those stakes that hold that fence are secure, that they stop moving the stakes of that fence, that they stay inside the fence, and then we'll all be happier people. But it's going to be something that it's going to have to take the people to be the sheepdogs and go to court and force these judges and force these lawyers to straighten up and fly right and do what's right and stop this nonsense of caving in and giving in to the money and the corporations and the powers that be. It has to stop.
Right, and I hear people use legal terms to try to say that we've become, legal property and this and that. The fact is, the operations of the rules of the court haven't changed. If we use those rules and so on for our purposes, we can say the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership, we can nullify them and say these are trying to slide a treaty by violating congressional and other rules. We can take things like the Roe versus Wade and the abortion issue and deal with the fact that the genetic personhood issue makes them legally persons at the moment of conception to the moment of natural death. We can get rid of Obamacare, which literally is shrouding eugenicide of elderly people because they have a certain age or a certain, score. They call it Apache score, where they talk about in the intensive care unit because I work in ICU.
My goodness.
And what I want people to understand is every one of these can be legally attached, just like the restraining of this President Obama. And this man calls himself a constitutional expert. He's done everything to violate the Constitution. If he calls himself a constitutional lawyer, I don't believe so. I think this man, if he has any knowledge at all, he's being directed to disassemble America. And again, disassemble the Christian principles that are America, that each of us is a sovereign made in the image of the Most High. He wants to turn us into property of the state. And all of those things can be turned back by one action. That is learning jurisdictionary and going to court and fighting the battles to stop smart meters, abortion, partnerships, illegal treaties, the stripping down of our military, the forcing and the breaking of marriage and the marriage vows that are sacred religious vows by intervention of the state. All of these can only be stopped in the court. And your course is the way to do it. And welcome back, and we have Fareed here for KARDIOVASC. KARDIOVASC, our new name for Cardivite, which contains the ginkgo biloba. I can tell you it's one of the most important things you can do with your body is to maintain circulation. In fact, perfusion is everything. Perfusion is everything. Fareed, I want you to go through some of the different components of KARDIOVASC and explain to people. And again, the primary things it's going to do is it's going to protect your artery walls against damage. It's going to remove the heavy metals and biotoxins that interfere with arterial wall function of your mitochondria. It's going to prevent plaque formation. It's going to detox your body. And it's even going to supply the kind of nutrition that supports stem cell regeneration of your heart and blood vessels. In fact, when people start taking this, blood pressure's dropped, circulation's improved, sexual function's improved, brain perfusion's improved, kidney function's improved, liver detoxification's improved. Everything's better. Even in fact, people started taking KARDIOVASC after their heart attack or after they've had vascular problems, and they noticed that, hey, the heart wall muscle that was damaged, the akinetics of the heart wall now are restored on a transesophageal echogram or CT scan, and it shows that the heart that was damaged, that was akinetic, is now moving and contracting properly. It's just amazing. So tell us what's in it and why it's so important that people take KARDIOVASC every day. I tell them every adult over 20 should be on some dosage of KARDIOVASC, even before you develop hypertension. And every child with any health problem, including my daughter with Down syndrome, she takes KARDIOVASC in her, quote, syrup every day.
Yeah, that's right, Dr. Bill. Well, the KARDIOVASC formula is was developed by my dad. My dad is a retired pharmacist and herbalist, and he studied pharmacognosy for 5 years at the University of Würzburg in Germany. And pharmacognosy is just a fancy way of saying the study of herbal medicine. So he knows his stuff. He's practiced in his pharmacy for many, many years. So he came up with a 7-ingredient formulation designed to reduce cardiac risk factors and improve circulation, or what you refer to as perfusion. So the main ingredient is hawthorn, and we use a hawthorn wheat and flour extract grown in Europe. And we look for a marker compound called Vitexin, which we test for on every batch.
Right, and Vitexin, of course, these marker compounds mean that you're the only company that does this. There's a lot of knockoffs, Heart and Body, Extendivite, and Strauss Heart Drops, all try to copy what you've done, and they can't. And they're inferior, and when people switch from these other products to KARDIOVASC, which is, of course, renamed from Cardivite, they get dramatic improvement. They say, I can't believe this. It's working. My circulation's improved. My, sexual function's improved. My brain's working better. I don't get cramps in my legs. I'm not short of breath anymore. We have people with congestive heart failure, and they're taking KARDIOVASC, and they say, I can't believe it. And you take it with a few other things that we recommend as well, and they're better. They say, I'm getting off all of my drugs. In fact, I got a consult this morning from Grand Cayman Islands about a gentleman. His wife is in serious congestive heart failure. She's taking KARDIOVASC, and she's taking a few other things we recommend. And because of that, she's getting off all her cardiac drugs. Gradually we're taking her off them all.
Yeah, exactly. So now the second ingredient in KARDIOVASC is garlic. We use an aged garlic extract standardized to 1% allicin.
Right, and of course that's going to be a natural ACE inhibitor. It's going to be also a natural antipathogenic to kill off the nanobacteria that form plaque. So it has two major effects that improve microcirculation and prevent plaque formation.
Yep. And then also for circulation, we've got the cayenne and the ginkgo biloba and the bilberry.
And the bilberry is a natural antioxidant to prevent oxidative stress, creating oxidized fatty acids and oxidized cholesterol called 9-noronyl hydroxycholesterol that, by the way, when it attaches to the proteins of your endothelial lining, acts as an adjuvant. Its cholesterol by itself is not pro-vascular disease. The research Dr. Chernov at the Russian Institute in 1904 and later researched that with using margarine back at the McGill University in the 1920s, tried to say that cholesterol was bad. It's been reversed in the 1990s where they did research with non-oxidized cholesterol, and they found, in fact, cholesterol is the best patch to protect your artery walls and your brain. 2/3 of the dry weight of your brain is cholesterol or cholesterol-modified molecules. Cholesterol does not cause heart disease. In fact, I did research with Dr. Moskovitz at the University of British Columbia in the late 1970s, and we had Eskimos down from Northwest Territories in Alaska, and they had cholesterols of 2,800 to 3,600, and had not a one of them had any blockage of their arteries. So the idea is when you have heavy metals in your diet, when you have sugar in your diet that causes oxidative stress, when you have other factors that cause oxidative stress to your artery walls, that's what causes it, and KARDIOVASC reverses that. So when people have had vascular problems, we tell them don't race into the next drug like a beta blocker or a calcium channel blocker, which is a absolute no-no. Don't take any calcium channel blockers ever. And don't take an HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor. They will cause actually damage to your CoQ10 and your energy metabolism, and demyelinate different parts of your brain and affect your energetics of your mitochondria throughout your vascular system. These are absolute no-nos, as HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors are now proven to cause diabetes in women. There are lawsuits over it, and now they're proving it causes diabetes in men too. So KARDIOVASC is going to reverse that, and even if you're starting to develop these problems, the first step is what's called microcirculation and perfusion. That's why people get hypertension. That's why people get plaque. They have hypometabolism and hypoperfusion. Those two hypos are what causes heart and vascular disease. It's not the deficiency of half a dozen cardiac drugs that the knucklehead cardiologists and primary care doctors are going to give you. And when you take diuretics, if you're not replacing the minerals, you're going to demineralize your bones, and you're going to take the minerals to cut out the active site of all your enzymes. So KARDIOVASC is what you want. It's amazing. And you're diabetic, and you're taking it for years, and you're perfectly healthy, aren't you?
Yeah, in fact, I'm actually at our glider club. I fly gliders, and as you can imagine, every year they put me through a whole bunch of tests to make sure that I can, pass my medical and continue to take passengers and so on.
Right.
And, cardiovasc is part of a regimen, obviously combined with diet and exercise and all that other stuff, but it's a very important part of my regimen.
Right, and if you want to stop glycation, you take our fat-soluble ultrathymine B1, you take carnosine to stop singlet oxygen, and take cell detox glutathione and Nutritrala, and Regenerex to prevent free radical oxidation. So cardiovasc is the first step toward getting your health back, and I tell people one of the most important first steps in restoring your health and even preventing cancer is to improve perfusion, because a high redox state, a well-oxygenated tissue, a tissue that has its normal health and redox state high, is unlikely to grow stealth pathogens to trigger off cancer or autoimmune diseases. So, hyperperfusion is bad stuff. If you have low perfusion or low circulation to tissues, you're going to get disease in those target organs. They're going to grow stealth pathogens, going to switch genes on and off, they're going to cause plaque formation. People tell us, too, they start taking our cardiovasc, and they say, Doc, I'm remembering my grocery list. I'm remembering my friends' names, my grandchildren. I don't get cramps in my legs when I go and exercise and do a weekend warrior and do 18 holes of golf. That's how important this is, because the population, I think, is getting more and more unhealthy from a toxic world, a world laced with tons of toxic drugs, genetically modified food, too much sugar in the diet, and I call recreational drugs, WRECK drugs, and all the other things that are kind of assaulting people, and then they wonder why they're getting sicker. Well, they're getting sicker because they're destroying their body's ability to detoxify and to perfuse their tissues. And of course, that's where cardiovasc majors on those two major things: detoxification and perfusion.
Yep.
So, do you have any other testimonials you've heard lately? Because I have so many. I mean, from heart disease, detoxification, liver function, kidney function, peripheral circulation. People have had blocked arteries and said, well, we're going to have to do a bypass of your artery in your leg in 6 months if it doesn't improve. They start on cardiovasc. 6 months later, they say, Doc, they did their NEVA scan or an ultrasound of their arteries, and no need for surgery. That's pretty amazing. And if they've had a heart bypass operation, you don't want to block off those new fragile vessels you pulled out of your leg, or you're going to die. You're going to die. And I tell people, if you've had a previous history that you've had vascular problems like a deep vein thrombosis, a blocked artery or stent put in anywhere, or you have circulatory problems in your brain, you need to be on cardiovasc now, and you want to tighten the dosage high enough, which might be a little higher than what you might think. Take our other nutraceuticals that we'll recommend, and you will avoid the bullet.